So what are we talking about when we are talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion? A quick definition, what is very important is to distinguish between the so-called surface level diversity and the deep level diversity. The surface level diversity means what you immediately recognize when you meet people. So at the moment, because we are on the screen, you see that I'm white, I'm a woman. You hear from my accent that I'm not native English. If I would speak German, you would recognize that I'm not Swiss. You recognize my age, maybe you know that I'm from the University of St. Gallen, and so on and so on. So this very often leads that we put people into boxes very quickly, the so-called unconscious biases, you know, this first impression we have from people. So depending on the image of the University of St. Gallen you have in mind, you might already have put me in a box, maybe. So please let the box open to see what's coming next. But what is much more important if we work together is the so-called deep level diversity. So the values we share, the attitudes, the working practices, the working styles, the level of quality of work we want to achieve, and so on. But this usually only becomes visible in the process of working together. Yes, you can ask several questions during the recruiting process, but at the end of the day, you will only know when you work together with people. But these dimensions are much more important to work together, and they can also overshadow the so-called primary dimensions of diversity. So think of a photo of a perfect non-executive board, you know, very heterogeneous, men, women, people of color, different age groups, and so on. But all the persons have studied, let's say, at Harvard or at the University of St. Gallen. So a very similar mindset, probably. And the surface level diversity is fine, but the deep level diversity is not very diverse. What is inclusion when we are talking about inclusion? Inclusion is always my personal perception, whether I feel included, and what does this mean? I have, on the one hand, the feeling that I belong to the CCDI, to the University of St. Gallen, to my team, to the company, whatever. And at the same time, I have the need for being recognized as an individual with all the uniqueness I bring to the table. So it's both needs that need to be balanced, that I have a feeling of inclusion. And a very important statement I want to make here is diversity follows inclusion. We will see afterwards what the best do better is they start with inclusion and not with diversity. What does this mean? It's a focus on an inclusive culture and also adapting the structures and processes that they are more inclusive for different groups of people. And a very important key issue here is inclusive leadership. So to what extent is leadership aware of unconscious bias, psychological safety, and the benefits of diversity and inclusion, for example? So what's the current situation in Switzerland? And I do not want to bore you with a lot of numbers, but of course I have to make a statement at the beginning. So my first question is, are Swiss companies using the potential of all their employees, or is there still room for improvement? If we look at the numbers of the Gender Intelligence Report we publish annually, so the next one will be published in September this year, you see it's still a man's world. And we are going in the right direction, so we do make progress, but at the snail's pace. So it's slow, you know. The pipeline is filling up from the lowest management levels, but still it's very leaky and we lose talents up the hierarchies. What is also still an issue in Switzerland, but also globally, are the wage differences. They exist. Again, there is progress, they are decreasing. But if we look at the different management levels, especially upper and middle management, women in Switzerland earn, for example, 9,565 Swiss francs, whereas men earn nearly 15% more. So there is still a lot of work to do. There are some reasons behind. You might get an idea in a minute. Again, we are in the right direction. We are evolving in the right direction, but we are not where we want to be. So family models are changing. That's a very important thing. I usually do a lot of unconscious bias or diversity awareness trainings, inclusion awareness trainings. And then I ask about the traditional division of labor in Swiss families, and people are always shocked how much it changed. And what you can see here is that the traditional division of labor, so father working full-time and mother is not employed. Of course, she is working, but not employed and not earning any money, is decreasing quite a lot, or has decreased in the last 10 years from 2010 to 20. Also, the model where the women are only working at a very small employment rate, part-time at a very small employment rate, so below 50%, is decreasing, and the other models are increasing. So fathers working still full-time, but mothers at a very high part-time employment, or both part-time or both full-time. All these models are increasing. So that's the good news. Family models are changing, but the unpaid care work and the housework remains predominantly the responsibility of women as soon as couples have children. So it kicks back again when there are children, then the traditional division of labor comes back more prominently. What you see here is that couples with children, the green bars show that the main responsibility is with the women, and how do you say, an equal share of care work and housework. It's only a quarter of the couples, and that the man is responsible for the care work. That's a tiny amount of 5%. If you look at couples without children, you see it's more balanced. Still, a lot of women are in charge of care work, but it's more equally balanced compared to when children are there. So, to what extent do Swiss companies provide flexible working models for employees at different stages of their lives, and is it also accepted? So the provision of the models is the one thing. Do the employees really take it? Do they have any negative impacts? Have a look at numbers. The first is, if we look at the results of the Gender Intelligence Report, what we see is that promotions are given primarily to employees between 30 and 40. And here I always challenge the companies, or we challenge the companies, because the younger ones now entering the workforce, they will not be retired with 65, definitely, I bet. So they will have a longer period of active working, being employed, up to 60 years. Does it really make sense that we have the peak of our career in the late 30s or beginning of the 40s, and then for the next 20 to 30 years, what do we do? So you really have to rethink our career models in the companies, and I think there is a large room for improvement. To not press everything in the rush hours of life, so in this 30 to 40, but make offer more flexibility when it comes to careers. The other still very persistent thing is, I want to have a question for you here. If we look at the number of promotions, so let's say all promotions, these are 100%. What's the percentage of those with an employment rate below 80%? Promotion below 80%. What do you think? Give me a guess. Just open your microphone and give me a number.
10%.
10%?
We think 10% too.
I would also say 10%.
Okay.
I say 2.
2. Yeah. Gesa, you are close. It's 4. It's below 4. It's 4%. So the majority of promotions goes to full-time workers. And then there are still 14% for the ones close to full-time, so 80 to 99%. And below 80, it's only 4%. And this has an impact if we look at the turnover rates of part-time workers by gender, so comparing men and women. And what you see here is a higher turnover rate for men working part-time, especially working up to 80%, so 50 to 60 and 60 to 80%. So this is against the norm, because you have seen men are usually working full-time, and if they work part-time, they kind of have a deviation from the norm, and the companies seem not ready to include them properly. So we see this higher turnover rate with part-time working men. If we look at the last bar here, the full-time workers, you see a slightly, but only a slightly higher turnover rate with women, because again, that's not the usual thing. A lot of women work part-time. But still, our impression is, when we look at these numbers, that the integration of full-time working women is better than the integration of part-time working men in companies. So again, here is room for improvement. So what are latest trends we see? What is very interesting, that's a study from some colleagues, that the fathers or future fathers want to work less for money. So you see, the ideal of the part-time working man is they think it would be perfect if both men and women would work 60%. The ideal of the part-time man with a higher level of education, they have the feeling, yeah, it's okay if men work a little bit more than women, but still very close, 70% for the men and 60% for the women. And the ideal, even for the full-time working man, you see here is 80%, and then 50% for the woman. And if I show you now the average employment rate of men in Switzerland, that's 96%. So, and even for the full-time working man, it's 80%. So I assume there will be a discussion in the future with regards to working hours, weekly working hours. They might probably come down. Let's see. Okay, another topic that is becoming more widely recognized, so that's also due to the murder of George Floyd, of course, is very important, is racism and ethnic discrimination. And here, especially the communication departments have a lot of work to do. Do you recognize why I bring these two children with the hoodies? What you can see here, the white boy has a hoodie and it says...
Because of the monkey.
Exactly.
Mm.
So the coolest monkey in the jungle, and the black boy is wearing this hoodie, and the white boy, it says the survival expert. So very hidden racist messages. That's from H&M, a campaign that was not that well approved. So there is a lot to do. If you ask people in Switzerland, they say, the US and Great Britain, they have problems with racism, but we in Switzerland, we don't have. And then if you talk to them, bring some examples what people experience here and so on, you very often then they see the importance of this topic, but still at a very, I would say at a very low level. Further trends and future topics we see coming up is a very, very important topic, age inclusion. I mean, we are all getting older. We have since 2 or 3 years in Switzerland, we have more people that are retired compared to the ones entering the workforce. And this will be pronounced in the next years because of the baby boomers getting retired and so on. And I am also a little bit concerned about the media in this, dealing with this topic, because they are always stretching the generation issues, so the different generations and the generations can't work together and so on. Just to make you aware of, there is no empiric evidence that there is something like a generation. Because just to give you an example, I can be a mother with 17, 18 or 20, or I can become a mother with 40. I will probably have similar challenges, and the date of birth is not that relevant. So it's, I mean, yeah, there are some differences maybe in the working styles and how they use the social media and so on, but still only the birth date being this criteria for distinguishing between different generations is obviously not the best idea. What is also very important is the inclusion of neurodiversity, because again, just to give you a fact, 85% of all disabilities you can't see. So, for example, you don't know whether I have ADHS or I have long COVID or whatever, you just don't see it. And people might have some restriction and a lot of talent, but they don't perform in a mainstream way. And if you are aware of different kinds of neurodiversity, so that's very important to integrate them properly. And then what we also see coming up is individual leave. So as a fringe benefit from the company, that people that work or have worked for a longer time for the companies, they have the possibility for longer leaves to recover, to recharge their batteries, and then come back, or maybe also change positions. Overall, our recommendation is always, if you invest in diversity, equity, and inclusion measures, make sure that they benefit all employees. So it's better to, for example, offer flex work models in the whole company and not say, yeah, mothers or the ones that do further education, they have the possibilities and the rest not. So just a few words on successful implementation of diversity, equity, and inclusion. What are the best doing better? And as I already mentioned, they start with inclusion. So they are anchoring diversity and inclusion. This means they usually have inclusion targets for their managers, not only diversity targets, not only a women's quota or a quota for younger or older people, but clear inclusion targets. And this is very important. You also have to integrate criteria, inclusion criteria in the hiring and in the promotion process. If you still go on promoting the high-performing ego pigs, I call it, you won't end up with an inclusion culture. So you have to look for people who are bridge builders, who are very inclusive, listen to their employees, and so on. What they also do, they strengthen inclusive leadership. So because leadership is key to progress with an inclusion culture, They put efforts on inclusion trainings for managers. So what does this mean? How to be aware of biases, how to make sure to build psychological safety in a team. And these are not the rocket science change programs. These are small things leaders can implement on a daily basis and make a difference. And what they also do, they work simultaneously in two areas. So not only having, for example, unconscious bias workshops or something like this, or awareness training, but also adjusting the structures and the processes, because that's very important. Just think of a job ad, and then you have all these bullet points. And we know from research that women and people of marginalized group are usually not applying if there are a lot of bullet points. So if the mask I have to enter the job ad limits my bullet points with 3, I can't do 10. So this is meant with the structures and the processes, just to adjust them that they are more inclusive. Because then we start a positive spiral. It's very important. We always recommend to frame it as a learning journey, because we are all on a learning journey. You know, I was not raised with transgender people, so I had no idea what kind of challenges these people have. So I had to learn. And it's a learning journey for all of us, and we are not perfect. So really also to emphasize, just start the journey or go on with your journey, even if there are backlash. So if we fix the system, the processes and the structures, reduce the biases, have clear goals, make managers accountable, we will end up with a more inclusive culture, and at the end with more diversity in the pipeline and at the top. So I summarize here very quickly. It's very important that it's a strategic topic, that it's treated like any other strategic topic in the company, not a side program, not in German we would say a Schönwetter program. So it's a core business topic. Then promote inclusion. So start with inclusion and choose a systemic approach. So not very small things here and there, but a whole concept, a whole strategy, how to make this work.